Hey, I'm Andrew from BTO Range, and we're going to do another little gun that we picked up the other day. We get cool guns coming in at the range almost every week, so we thought we would highlight some of them in this little series of videos. Interesting history here. This particular gun today is a Smith & Wesson Model 2 old model, sometimes called the Model 2 Army. They were made from 1861 until about 1872, 1874. This particular guy was made in 1868, 69. So the interesting thing about these, it's a little bit of the history of Smith & Wesson that leads up to this gun, because they're rather significant. Horace Smith and Daniel Wesson were working with a company called Volcanic Arms Company on a lever-action magazine-fed pistol and lever-action magazine-fed rifle. And things just weren't working out, so they went and reformed their partnership with Smith & Wesson. Interestingly, they sold that Volcanic Arms Company to a stockholder in the company by the name of Oliver Winchester. And the Winchester Arms Company then came from that particular collaboration. But in any event, at the time, they had been working on a prototype for a revolver with bored-through cylinder, where you loaded it from the back with ideally a self-contained metallic cartridge. And they found out that there was a designer named Roland White working for Colt, that had worked for Colt, that actually had patented that in the United States. So they worked out a royalty deal with Mr. White to pay him 25 cents per pistol. And they developed a revolver with bored-through cylinder, and they had a licensing agreement with Roland White for that patent. So they got a jump over Colt with that. Colt was limited to percussion-style revolvers until 1872, and that patent expired. And Smith & Wesson was able to produce what became the modern revolvers of the day. So they started out with the Model 1, the predecessor of this gun, which was a small frame little 7-shot 22 long rifle, and they developed or 22 short. They developed the 22 short metallic cartridge to go with it. But with Civil War going on, there were a lot of people that had a lot of interest in a gun with more power than the 22 short could provide. So they designed this guy here, and it was chambered in the 32 rimfire cartridge. So although it was never adopted or purchased by any army, a lot of individual officers and individual soldiers privately purchased these, and they were used on both sides of the Civil War, primarily the Union. But I think Kentucky might have armed some of their militia with about 700 of these on a purchase. But other than that, they didn't see it. It wasn't an official military sidearm. But it was kind of the beginning of the metallic cartridge days with revolvers. So this guy here is pretty unique, and we'll get to some markings on this gun here in just a second. It's a 6-inch barrel. The two most common barrel lengths are 5 and 6 inch on this gun. This is a 6. The 4 is rare. The 8 is extremely rare. And then less than a dozen, I think, 10-inch guns were produced. The 4-inch guns are heavily faked, so when you look at those, you have to look and see where the barrel inscription on the top is versus where the front sight is, and do that measurement to see if it's a cut down of the more common 6 or 8-inch guns. And by common, really not that common. Maybe 75,000 of these guns were produced in the total model run. So by today's standards, certainly not a whole bunch. But if you remember, these guns were produced prior to electricity, prior to CAD/CAM machines, prior to CNC machining. These were steam-powered machines these guys were working with, and hand-fitting all these parts. So the fact that they're machined so well is pretty impressive. Collectors recognize up to 9 different variations of this Model 2 old model. The very earliest ones only had 2 pins here in the top strap. This 3rd pin was added after about 5,000 units were produced to limit the travel of this cartridge stop on the top. Unlike later guns, including Smith & Wesson, but all the other break-open style revolvers, this is actually a tip-up. So the barrel tips up, the cylinder comes out to load. It's pretty straightforward. You load it, drop the cylinder back in, and put it back in. So we were talking about Roland White and his bored-through revolver patent. Smith & Wesson didn't buy the patent. They licensed it for a royalty fee, which was kind of smart because they knew that there would be patent infringements. And that was, Colt was going through that with the percussion revolvers. Companies like Manhattan Arms and a bunch of other folks were putting out revolvers that just blatantly infringed on the patent, and there was lawsuits and litigation. And that happened too with the bored-through cylinder revolvers. So being that Smith & Wesson didn't buy the patent, they licensed it, it was up to Roland White to really defend the patent in litigation. So he was spending almost all that royalty money he was getting on the revolvers defending his patent from all these other companies. Probably the most famous one was against a company called Allen and Wheelock, which later became Hopkins and Allen, and then H&R, and then it just went down the chain from there. But they actually challenged the validity of the patent because prior artwork had existed with bored-through cylinders. And they even brought in a gentleman from France that had been making pinfire revolvers with bored-through cylinders prior to this patent. In any event, generally, White, with the assistance of Smith & Wesson, won those patent infringement cases, but he didn't receive a whole lot of money from it. And he really ended up not making a whole bunch of money from that patent. And then when the patent expired in 1872, Colt was waiting for that. And of course, then, you know, the 1872 revolver, and then of course the famous 1873 single action army was born from there. So the little gun is pretty important in firearm history. Now the markings on this little gun, we have the barrel legend is simple Smith & Wesson, Springfield, Massachusetts here on this top rib. And we actually have the patent dates, which are really hard to see because they're in such fine lettering, but they run the circumference of the cylinder. So there's very, very light, faint marking. Now remember, this gun is 150 something years old, right? So you can barely see them right there. I'm not sure how well we can focus on it, but they're there around the circumference. The patent markings referencing the Roland White patent are there. So we have the serial number on the butt of the gun. And again, that is 1 digit away from a known gun that went to Japan. So about 1,500 of these guns went to Japan, and they were used in the feudal era of the samurai time. There was a lot of private ownership of firearms in Japan among the people, the upper classes, if you will, in Japan. But they were, at the time, they were required to register them in whatever prefecture they lived at, and that was usually marked on the gun. And in all of these other guns of the same Japanese ownership, I've seen them marked in the metal on the side here. This particular gun has the Japanese kanji characters vertically on this grip panel. Now, to me, that I've not seen that before. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I certainly haven't seen all of them, but that to me is just a little suspicious. I don't know, they look like they've been there forever, and I haven't attempted to translate it, but this is definitely date, and this is going to be the prefecture from where it was registered. So, plus the fact that it's only 1 digit away from a known Japanese gun with provenance, fairly certain that it is a Japanese gun, at least went to Japan at some point. This particular gun has an excellent bore, which is kind of unusual for this model because all of this was way before smokeless powder. It still times perfectly well across all cylinders. The bore is excellent, the chambers are excellent. I doubt it's been fired much. It's just a wonderful, cool piece of history in an antique firearm. Now, when I say antique firearm, there's a legal definition of that. Under federal law anyway, firearms or guns made before 1899 are not classified as firearms. Now that said, you don't have to do a 4473 when you buy one. There's generally, it can be shipped straight to your door depending on your local jurisdiction, what regulations they might have. So there's a little bit more saleability, I guess. I don't know if that's the correct way to look at it, but there's a good business on, particularly ones in decent condition like this. We don't have very active rust or pitting. It's obviously been cleaned at some point, but it's in way above average condition for a gun that was made in 1868 or 1869. right after the Civil War. So anyway, this is just another cool little piece that we picked up, and we hope to bring you more stuff. I know we have some cool Remington product over there that we're going to bring out, and maybe even some later stuff from the 70s and 80s that were low production that would make an interesting little video. So if you guys have any questions, please drop them in the comments. We'll be happy to answer them as best we can. And again, thanks for watching. Appreciate it as always, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks a lot.